In 1638, a construction worker made a mistake. He was part of a team hired to expand the eastern wing of a palace in central Anatolia. His job was simple: measure the walls, mark the boundaries, begin the foundation. He measured the outer wall. Then he measured the inner wall. The numbers did not match. He measured again. Same result. He called his supervisor. The supervisor measured. Same result. Between the outer wall and the inner wall of the eastern wing, there was a space of considerable size, a space that should not have been there, a space that had no entrance, a space that, according to every official document connected to this palace, did not exist. The supervisor wrote a single line in his records that day: "There is something behind the wall. We do not know what it is." And then, construction continued around it, not through it. That note sat in an archive for 270 years before anyone read it. I want you to think about that. A construction team in 1638 found something they could not explain, and their response was not to investigate, not to report it, not to tear down the wall and look inside. Their response was to build around it and say nothing. This palace was built in 1509, commissioned by a regional governor named Pasha Selim, a man known throughout the Ottoman Empire for one thing above all others: he never did anything without a reason. Every room in this palace had a documented purpose. The records are extraordinarily detailed. We know the dimensions of every chamber. We know what furniture was placed in each room. We know how many candles were used in the main hall on a typical evening. Pasha Selim documented everything, except one thing. The space behind the eastern wall does not appear in any document from his lifetime. Not in the construction records, not in the architectural plans, not in the palace inventory that was completed 1 year after the palace was finished. It was not an oversight. Pasha Selim was not a man who made oversights, which means he chose not to document it. In 1521, 12 years after the palace was completed, a visiting dignitary named Ibrahim al-Rashid stayed at the palace for 3 weeks. He kept a detailed journal of his visit. The journal survived. It is currently held in a library in Istanbul. On the 14th day of his visit, he wrote something that historians have debated for over a century. He wrote, "I heard sounds from the eastern wall last night, not loud, not frightening. The sound of something that had been waiting for a very long time. That is the complete entry for that day. Nothing before it, nothing after it." He never mentioned the eastern wall again. Historians have suggested various explanations: animals trapped inside the walls, structural settling of the stone, wind passing through gaps in the construction. None of these explanations have satisfied the researchers who have studied this case most closely. Because of what was found 117 years later. In 1638, the same year the construction team found the unexplained space, a palace servant named Fatima wrote a letter to her sister. The letter was never sent. It was found tucked inside a book in the palace library during a cataloguing project in 1923. She wrote, "I have worked in this palace for 11 years. I have cleaned every room, every corridor, every staircase. There is one place I have never been asked to clean. The eastern wing," she wrote, "has a section that the senior staff do not discuss. New servants learn quickly not to ask about it, not because anyone tells them not to, because of the way the older servants look at you when you ask." She wrote, "I asked once. The head housekeeper looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, 'That part of the palace is not for us.' I asked what she meant. She did not answer. Fatima never mentioned the Eastern Wing again in her letter. She went on to describe other things: the food, the weather, a disagreement with another servant. But that phrase stayed with me when I first read her letter. That part of the palace is not for us. Not, that part is dangerous. Not, that part is forbidden. Not, that part is private. Not for us. As if it belonged to someone. Or something. That was not the people who lived and worked there every day. I have spent considerable time trying to understand what the head housekeeper meant by those 4 words. I have not found a satisfying answer, but I have found what was inside that space. And in part 2, I will tell you exactly what the team found when they finally opened that wall. What they found did not answer the question of what the space was for. It made the question considerably harder to answer. The wall was opened in 1909, not as part of an investigation, not because someone had read the 1638 construction note, not because anyone was looking for anything. A structural engineer hired to assess the stability of the Eastern Wing tapped the wall with a small hammer. Standard procedure. He was checking for hollow sections that might indicate weakness in the foundation. The wall was hollow. He filed a report. The report was passed to the palace administrator. The administrator authorized a small opening, just large enough to see inside. 3 workers spent 2 days carefully removing stones from a section of the lower wall. When the opening was large enough, the engineer stepped through. He stood inside for 11 minutes. His 2 assistants waited outside. They reported later that he said nothing during those 11 minutes. No exclamation, no reaction. Complete silence. When he came out, he sat down on the floor of the corridor. He did not speak for several minutes. His assistants asked what was inside. He said, "I need to write this down before I describe it to anyone." His report was filed the following day. It is 4 pages long. It is written in the careful, precise language of a professional engineer, a man trained to observe and record without interpretation, and even in that careful language. You can sense that he was struggling to describe what he had seen in terms that made sense. The space was not a room in any conventional sense. It was a corridor, long and narrow, running the entire length of the Eastern Wing. The floor was covered in a layer of fine white sand, perfectly smooth, undisturbed. Along both walls, at regular intervals, there were stone shelves, built directly into the wall. Each shelf was exactly the same size. Each shelf was exactly the same height from the floor, and on each shelf, an object, placed with extraordinary deliberate care. The engineer counted 41 shelves, 41 objects. Each object was wrapped in dark cloth. When the cloth was carefully removed from the first object, the engineer found a small ceramic vessel, sealed, decorated with a pattern he did not recognize. He did not open the vessel that day. At the far end of the corridor, he found one final thing: a single stone panel carved with a single line of text. These are not objects. These are questions. Each one was placed here by someone who did not know the answer. They are waiting for someone who does. The vessels were opened over the following months by a team from the Imperial Museum. Inside each vessel, a small piece of folded paper, a single question, written in a different hand. Why did my father never speak about his childhood? Where did the money go after the harvest of 1601? What happened to the family that lived east of the river before we arrived? 41 questions, written by 41 different people. Ordinary people, servants, traders, farmers, people who left behind the one question they could not answer. Someone built a space inside this palace specifically so that ordinary people could leave behind the things they could not resolve. Who built it? We do not know. Why it was built? We do not know. Whether anyone ever came to read the questions? We do not know. For 150 years, people found that corridor. They brought their questions. They sealed them in vessels. They placed them on shelves. And they left. Without answers. The corridor still exists. The shelves are empty now. The vessels are in a museum in Istanbul. The questions have been read and catalogued and studied, but not answered. 41 people left. 41 questions in a hidden corridor inside a palace that should not have had a hidden corridor. And the only thing we know for certain is that none of them ever came back. If you want to know about the palace where workers found something even stranger beneath the foundation, something that should not have been physically possible, that story is coming next. Subscribe, and I will see you there.